We jump right into the case studies. The first one is about a bigger company in the insurance space, and you're going to share a case that has to do with thought leadership and getting to that thought leadership, and not just like the very fragmented, hey, let's do social media blasts all the time, but something more meaningful. So
Yeah,
take it away on case study number one.
great. So I thought it would be interesting to just share the importance of data and research and how that can be used globally, regionally, and locally. When you're communicating in the B2B space, you're trying to sell products, you're trying to sell services, but you're really trying to sell your company, as the smartest person in the room, as the entity that knows the most and has the best talent and has the best solutions and understands, customers' challenges in the most meaningful way. And data and research is a great way to do that. Can be as simple as, a little poll. But for the case study here, we're talking about a large global organization that has thousands and thousands of executives and customers that are in the CRM, that are there available to, and that, audience is available to be mined. And this doesn't have to be, any company doesn't have to be global to make this kind of strategy work. But for this case, it's a survey of executives across the globe, really looking at what are their key issues and challenges that they face and what are they seeing on the horizon, what's keeping them up at night, and then turning that into a piece of content that is showing what across the globe people are thinking about, executives of businesses, as well as regionally, what's happening in the US, what's happening in Europe, and slicing it even further down to specific markets, what's happening in Illinois, what's happening in Chicago. What do the folks in the Chicago region, what are they most concerned about in their businesses and in their practices? What macroeconomic conditions are affecting them? What are the challenges there? And how can, on the backside, this company bring solutions to help with those challenges? So that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think it's great when companies will actually engage the intended audience for who the thought leadership is for in the actual research. Because from a marketing perspective, it's a customer touch point, right? You're reaching out saying, do you want to participate in this? And then once it's done, they're going to read it on the back end. So you're getting their share of mind, and they're doing it in a way where it's part of that brand experience. When you collected the information, like how was the survey? Was it a survey? Was it in person? How did they collect it?
In this case, it was a survey. So there are, clients across the globe to tap into. But for folks that are listening today, they might be, thinking, how could we execute something like this? And there's a lot of ways to do it. Not only fielding your own survey with your own customers, but also partnering with a media organization or academia, where you can really use different audiences to build around those, to get those data points. But what's interesting about it is not just producing the survey and then serving it up to folks with the insights, which is certainly important, but it is all of the work product that goes around promoting that and using that content to leverage in multiple ways. So, I think that is where you get the real bang for the buck when it comes to ROI. You produce the report, and these things are not cheap to produce a report of some sort. And then you slice it up. You have a global opportunity for media relations, for example. You can go into the local markets with media relations for, national business media, or even down to local podcasts and business radio, newspapers, etc. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the speakers on the stage referred to this very report I'm thinking of. And
Yeah.
it was done about a year and a half ago, and it's still coming up in conversation and on the stage at this conference, because it is a proof point of what's happening in the industry and why people should care about the topics that are being discussed by the company.
Yeah, that's great. What is the duration that you actually need to field it? So are we talking like a month or two? How long does that take?
Well, it really depends on the size and scale. These things do not have to be so time intensive, although they can be. And it just really depends on the appetite, the budget, how readily available the data sources are, how your marketing engine can coalesce around it to really, amplify across multiple channels. But, we've also done some very easy LinkedIn polls, for example, where you go on and you capture a bunch of content in quick hits and turn around and produce it out in the content marketing. So it can be the spectrum of intense and complex and very simple and quick.
Yep. So the example I always like to refer to on the type of thought leadership you're talking about is the Edelman Trust Barometer. I feel like that was pretty early on where they just said, you know what, we're doing research on this space. We want to own this space. And they do it every year. And now, I mean, it's got to be 15, 20 years they've been doing this. And now the interesting parts are not even like the annual, refreshes. It's all the trend data to see what's been happening over the last 5 or 10 years. And I think that's really, as far as like owning a piece of thought leadership, once you have 5, 10 years under your belt, that's a great place to be because it's a well-oiled machine and people view you as, look, you've been around. You really know this space. How many years for this company were they doing this?
I would say at least a decade,
Yeah.
probably more than that. I'd have to go back, but it would probably be 10 to 15 years, yeah. And you're right, it is that trend data because, going back to, when you think about September 11th and those kinds of things that were really important back then, or the recent pandemic and how much that played into the decisions, and people may or may not have predicted that that was going to happen, and then, how it impacted them. So to see that over time, you can see those macro trends play in the data and how people are feeling about things.
Yeah. So this company's been doing it a while. It's got to be working, but now I'm kind of going into what were the measures of success. So when they do the readout of, look, we've done another report, we've sent it out. What do you look for? Like, what's your scorecard to measure the success of it?
Well, immediately it is the announcement. So we've done everything from have a, press conference in New York or in London. We've had ideas of partnering with doing it at the Global Economic Forum, kind of announcing
There it
there,
is.
using platforms that exist, as well as coordinated global communications effort and marketing effort. So launching on the same day, releasing to news media, sometimes doing a exclusive with a certain news organization, then translating it across the globe for the different markets. But that's really just the initial launch. From there, it is how do you trickle it down into the local markets and slice and dice the data to make it relevant for various markets. So you might be going into New York City and you want to focus on New York City content. So it is the initial launch and then an entire rollout that takes a long time to really squeeze as much as you can out of the thought leadership.
Yeah. Tell us more about the exclusive approach. And it doesn't have to be just for this company, but I'd love for you to share with the listeners just that angle of, hey, we'll give you something if you want to be the first to have it. Like, how does that go down? What do you share? What do you not share when you try to cultivate that type of an approach?
If I could shift gears to another quick case study, this will really underscore that. There was
Yeah.
a recent client that is in the healthcare industry, nurses, doctors, just the entire healthcare provider space, and did a big study, the largest of its kind, about what's happening in nursing and, kind of how nurses are feeling and what's happening with talent shortages, with burnout, et cetera. And so we used the approach of doing an exclusive, but it was more of an advance. So if you use the term exclusive, you're really saying, I'm going to take this to one news outlet. They're going to get it exclusively, and then I'll roll it out to everyone else. Well, this was more of an advance because there are so many organizations that we knew would want this, and we wanted them to have it because it was important content. So we didn't want to give it to one exclusively. We wanted to give it to about 7 as an advance. So they knew others were going to get it, but they were going to be getting it a little bit sooner. And they were agreed not to release it until the specific time that we noted. And at that time, we were having a press conference and we were sharing it over the newswire and really broadcasting it more broadly to all media, traditional and non-traditional. And so the deal is we will provide you with the content early, the study and the data early, give you time to digest it and produce your content if you agree not to release it until a certain time.
Yeah. How often in that scenario do they play by the rules? Because I've been involved in some of those where you think they're going to do exactly what you want as far as release dates, and they just run with the story 3 days in advance because they literally they want to break the news. So how do you manage that?
Well, you manage that through really good relationships with the journalists because they know, that's going to be the last time you ever give them that shot. If they do that, and if you have a good relationship and you really appreciate that relationship, it's on both sides, both the journalistic side and the PR side, they usually will kind of play by the unwritten rule that we're going to
Yeah.
go at this right time. And sometimes, I've had it happen where everyone agrees on it and then, a very excited, trigger happy web person turns it on before you're ready. So, things do happen. But at that point, the ball is rolling down the hill, and, usually there's not a lot of harm or foul, if that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. It's also like the element of don't run this early. Please don't run this this early,
Yes.
and then you do it and okay, thanks.
Yeah, we're out, we're going. It's
Yeah.
not a perfect science because, as we tell our clients, this is not a lot of PR and communications is storytelling. We're telling stories, we're communicating the news, and we're using journalists and others and working with them to communicate to their audiences. So we don't own the journalists, we don't own the publications, we're not paying for this is not an ad. So it is more of a relationship and a negotiation, more of an art than a science.